When the police knocked on my door that night, it wasn't a gentle knock. It was loud, firm, the kind that shakes the air around you. I froze for a second, my hands still wet from washing dishes, the hum of my old refrigerator the only sound in the room. 2 officers stood there when I opened the door, both serious-faced. "Ma'am," one said, "we got a call. Something about unattended kids, possible neglect." For a few moments, I couldn't even process what he said. Kids? Neglect? I live alone. My pulse didn't spike. I didn't panic. I just stepped aside and gestured for them to come in. "You can look around," I said quietly. My apartment was silent, tidy, small but comfortable. They walked through the living room, peeked into the spare bedroom, the kitchen, the bathroom, nothing but neatly folded laundry, 2 mugs on the counter, and a cat sleeping on the windowsill. When they left, polite, even embarrassed, I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just sat down on my couch and stared at the wall. Because I knew exactly who had made that call. My older brother, David. He's always been the golden one. Charming, talkative, the kind of guy who can make a room laugh in seconds. Growing up, he got away with everything. He crashed my first car when I was 22 and laughed it off because you've always been the careful one, you'll fix it. When he borrowed money, it wasn't borrowing, it was taking. My parents brushed it off. "That's just David," they'd say. "You know how he is." When he became a single dad at 36, I thought maybe that would change him, that he'd finally grow up. He had 2 kids, both sweet, smart, and full of energy. I loved them. I really did. So when he needed help, for a few hours, I said yes. Of course I said yes. But the few hours turned into weekends. Weekends turned into entire weeks. He'd drop them off with a rushed apology, toss me their backpacks, and disappear. Sometimes he'd come back smelling of beer and cigarettes. Sometimes he'd come back with a new tattoo or a new girlfriend. At first, I told myself I was doing it for the kids. They needed stability, and my home was safe. But the more he took advantage, the more invisible I felt. When I tried to talk to him, just calmly asking him to plan ahead, he'd explode. "You're selfish. You have no kids, no husband. You have all the time in the world. They're your family, too." He had this way of twisting guilt like a knife, and he always made sure my parents heard his version first. Suddenly, I wasn't the responsible sister anymore. I was the cold aunt who didn't want to help. One Saturday night, after the 5th emergency drop-off in a row, I told him I couldn't do it. I had a big presentation at the community center where I work as an art instructor, something that could finally get me promoted. I told him a week in advance that I couldn't take the kids that weekend. He said it was fine, but Friday night came, and at 10 p.m., he showed up anyway, kids half asleep in the car, backpacks in hand. When I refused to open the door, he started yelling from the hallway. My neighbors peeked out, my cat hissed. I didn't open the door. He eventually left. And I guess that's when he called the cops on me, pretending I'd abandoned his kids. That was the moment I realized something had to change. I couldn't just hope he'd respect boundaries. I had to create proof, protection, something that would finally make him stop. So I started documenting everything, every text, every voicemail, "Can you just watch them for a few hours?" message that turned into days, screenshots of his Facebook photos, him drinking at bars, him on trips with friends, while I was the one cooking dinner for his kids. I didn't plan revenge. I just wanted evidence because deep down I knew one day I'd need it. It came sooner than I thought. A week after the police visit, David showed up again. No apology, no shame. "You overreacted," he said. "I just needed a break." Then, like nothing had happened, he told the kids to kiss me goodbye and said, "You'll be with Auntie for a few days." I stopped him at the door. "David," I said, "not without signing this." He frowned. "What is it?" "Just a temporary care agreement," I lied smoothly, "for emergencies in case something happens while they're here." He barely looked at it, scribbled his name, and left. What he didn't realize was that paper gave me leverage, real legal proof that he was willingly leaving his kids without proper arrangements. I talked to a lawyer earlier that week who helped me draft it. "It's not about taking the kids," the lawyer told me. "It's about protecting yourself." And I did, because I was done being his safety net. When I closed the door that night after he'd driven off, I stood in the hallway for a long time. The kids were asleep on the couch, their shoes still on, their little backpacks tossed near the door. I felt a mix of anger and sadness. They didn't deserve any of this. None of it was their fault. I tucked them into bed, turned off the lights, and sat down at my kitchen table with that piece of paper in my hand, the one David had signed so casually. His handwriting was messy, rushed, just like everything about him. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how many times I'd excused him, how many times I'd let him make me feel guilty for wanting peace. Growing up, I was always the one who cleaned up his messes, the one who talked to teachers when he skipped school, who covered when he came home drunk as a teenager, who comforted Mom when he screamed at her. And somehow, every single time, he ended up being the victim. "He's just under pressure," they'd say. "He's just going through something." I don't think people like my brother ever really stop going through something. They just find new people to carry their burdens, and I had carried his for almost my entire life. The next morning, I called Child Protective Services, not to report him for abuse or to ruin his life. That wasn't my goal. I just wanted to make sure the kids were safe. I wanted someone official to know what was happening, to see the evidence I had, to tell him he couldn't keep using his children as emotional currency. The woman I spoke to was calm, professional. She asked for details, for documents, for proof. I sent her everything. The texts, the agreement he'd signed, screenshots of his social media. I told her I wasn't trying to take the kids, that I loved them, but I couldn't keep doing this. She listened carefully. "You did the right thing," she said softly before hanging up. 2 days later, I heard from her again. "We spoke to your brother," she said. "He's not happy, but he's been cooperative." They were putting him on a supervision plan, parenting classes, scheduled home visits, and temporary restrictions on who could care for the kids overnight. It wasn't dramatic or destructive. It was just accountability, something he'd never had before. But David didn't see it that way. That evening, I came home from work and found him sitting on the stairs outside my building. He looked furious. "You called CPS on me?" he snapped before I could even greet him. "David, you ruined my life," he shouted, cutting me off. His voice echoed in the stairwell. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Everyone's going to think I'm some kind of monster." I swallowed hard. "You brought this on yourself," I said quietly. "You can't keep dumping the kids on me whenever you feel like it. It's not fair to them. It's not fair to me." He laughed bitterly. "Oh, don't play saint now. You loved having them around. You're just jealous because they love me more." That hurt. Not because it was true. It wasn't. But because he knew exactly where to aim his words. He'd always known. I didn't yell back. I didn't even ask him to leave. I just went upstairs, locked my door, and cried quietly for the first time in a long time. Not for him, but for the kids. They were the ones caught in the middle of this mess, and no matter what happened, they'd suffer the most. A few weeks passed. Things settled a bit. CPS did their visits. David started attending his parenting classes, though mostly out of spite, I think. My parents called me constantly, sometimes to yell, sometimes to plead. "He's your brother," my mom cried once. "You don't air family problems to strangers." But I wasn't airing family problems. I was stopping a cycle. For the first time in my adult life, my weekends were quiet, peaceful. I could read a book, go for walks, have friends over without worrying about bedtime routines or homework or cleaning up spilled juice. It was strange at first, too quiet. But it was also freeing. One afternoon, I saw David's car parked near the playground. He was pushing his youngest on the swing, looking tired but attentive. It struck me then. Maybe this was what accountability looked like. Not revenge, not punishment, just forced awareness. That night, he texted me. "The kids asked about you." I hesitated for a long time before replying. "Tell them I miss them, and when you're ready to follow the rules, they can visit." He didn't answer, but a week later, he did call. Calm, subdued. "They can come over Saturday," he said. Just for a few hours, if you're okay with it. That Saturday was different. They came with smiles, hugs, laughter. I made pancakes, we watched movies, and when David came to pick them up, he was on time. He thanked me. He actually thanked me. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. For a while, things felt almost normal again. Or maybe normal in the way you define peace after years of chaos. I still kept my guard up, though. I wasn't naive enough to believe a few parenting classes would suddenly turn David into a responsible father. But he was trying, or at least pretending to. He'd text updates about the kids, soccer practice, school awards, dentist appointments, things he never cared to mention before. And for a moment, I wanted to believe it was real. Maybe the intervention had done what decades of lectures and second chances couldn't. Maybe finally he'd grown up. But if life has taught me anything, it's that patterns rarely disappear. They just find new disguises. It started subtly. He'd send me pictures of the kids' school projects, then slide in a comment about how tough things were financially. "Daycare's killing me," he'd text. "Wish I had your kind of stability." I ignored it at first, knowing where that line of conversation led. But then came the little guilt trips. "The kids miss you so much," he'd write. "Maybe if they spent more time with you, it'd help them emotionally. You're their safe place." It sounded sweet, almost noble, but I could read between the lines. Safe place really meant free childcare. One Friday afternoon, he called me at work. "I just got offered a last-minute DJ gig," he said excitedly. "It's a great opportunity. Can you watch the kids tonight?" "David, you know the agreement," I reminded him. "You can't just drop them off without notice." He sighed dramatically. "Come on, Leah, it's just one night. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." "I'm not making it hard," I said firmly. "I'm keeping boundaries." He hung up. I didn't hear from him again that night. The next morning, I found a long message waiting for me, one of his classic guilt rants. About how I'd changed, how I used to care, how I wasn't the sister he remembered. He ended with, "Don't worry, the kids are fine. I found someone who actually helps without complaining." Something about that last line made my stomach twist. I didn't know who he meant, but I knew I wouldn't like the answer. The following week, I got a call from the school counselor. Apparently the kids had mentioned staying with a lady Daddy just met. My chest tightened. This was exactly the kind of recklessness that had started everything months ago. I called him immediately. "Who were they staying with?" I demanded. He brushed it off. "Relax. She's a friend. They were safe." "A friend? You left them with a stranger, David." "She's not a stranger to me. To them she is." We argued until he hung up again. And for the first time, I didn't feel angry. I felt tired, bone-deep tired, because no matter how much progress he made, no matter how many chances life gave him, he always found a way to slide backward. That night, I reopened the folder I'd kept on my laptop, the one filled with screenshots, messages, and records from months before. I didn't plan to use it again, but seeing his carelessness reminded me that protecting those kids sometimes meant protecting them from him. I added the new messages to the file. Days later, CPS called again. Not because I reported him. Someone else did. Apparently, one of the kids mentioned the woman to their teacher, and the teacher had concerns. When the caseworker asked if I knew anything, I told the truth. I sent copies of the messages. I didn't sugarcoat it this time. David's reaction was predictable. He stormed into my workplace the next day. I'll never forget that moment. Him standing there, red-faced, shouting in front of my coworkers. "You just can't help yourself, can you? You love playing the hero." "Get out," I told him quietly. "This isn't the place." He didn't. Security had to escort him out. That night, my mom called again. Her voice was shaking. "He says you're trying to take his kids. Is that true?" I swallowed hard. "No, Mom. I'm trying to make sure they're safe." She was silent for a moment. Then she whispered, "You know, sometimes you sound just like your father." It felt like a slap, because our father had left when I was 15, and the last thing he ever said to her was that she made everyone's life harder by always needing to be right. I hung up without replying. After that, my family mostly stopped talking to me. I guess it was easier for them to believe David's version. The golden child's narrative was always more comfortable than the quiet truth. Still, I kept my distance and my peace. The CPS case wrapped up with stricter supervision for David, and the kids were assigned a part-time social worker who checked in weekly. They were doing okay, resilient as kids often are, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't miss them. The sound of their laughter echoing through my apartment, the small chaos of their presence. It was bittersweet, but I had to remind myself I wasn't their parent. I couldn't keep saving them at the cost of myself. One evening, as I sat reading, there was a soft knock on my door. Not fists this time, not panic, just a gentle tap. When I opened it, the oldest one, Emma, was standing there with a handmade card. It had glitter, crayons, and crooked letters. "Thank you for helping Daddy," she said shyly. "He's mad a lot, but I know you're trying." I hugged her tightly, holding back tears. After Emma left that evening, I sat at the table with the little card in my hands for a long time. It had a drawing of our family, me, David, and the kids, holding hands under a big yellow sun, the kind of simple, innocent picture that makes your heart ache. She had drawn me taller than everyone else, with a big smile. Her dad was drawn smaller, with what looked like a frown. Children see things we adults spend our lives trying to hide. That small gesture broke something open in me. I realized that even if my brother resented me, even if my parents refused to see what was happening, the kids understood more than anyone gave them credit for. They knew who showed up for them, who fed them, who listened when they were scared. But that realization came with a new kind of guilt, the kind that whispers, maybe you should have stayed quiet for their sake. Maybe keeping the peace would have hurt me, but at least it wouldn't have torn the family apart. That's what my mother's voice kept echoing in my head. Family should stick together. Still, deep down, I knew silence would have hurt the kids more in the long run. Weeks went by and the situation stabilized again. CPS confirmed that David was complying with their plan, though not without grumbling. He was attending mandatory counseling sessions and had limited custody for the time being. The kids stayed mostly with their mother's side of the family, a quiet couple who lived on the edge of town and didn't get involved in drama. I'd visit them sometimes, bringing art supplies or cookies, trying not to overstep. Then one Sunday afternoon, I got a call from David. His voice was calm but strangely distant. "I'm done," he said. "Done with what?" "With all of this. The classes, the meetings, the rules. They treat me like I'm some criminal. You win, Leah. You got what you wanted." I sighed. "David, this was never about winning." He laughed bitterly. "You keep saying that, but somehow you're always the one who comes out clean, while I'm the one everyone blames." I tried to reason with him, but it was useless. He'd already decided he was the victim again. I could almost hear the self-pity dripping from his voice. "They'll grow up hating me," he said, "and when they do, I'll tell them who made it happen." And just like that, he hung up. That call haunted me for days. I replayed it in my mind at work while making dinner, even while trying to sleep. What if he really gave up? What if his self-destruction dragged the kids down with him? I debated reaching out, but my therapist, yes, I had finally started seeing one, reminded me of something simple yet powerful. You can't save someone who refuses to take responsibility. So I didn't call. For the first time, I didn't chase the apology or the reconciliation. I let the silence stay. Months later, I got a message from my mother. David moved out of state. He says he needs a fresh start. No goodbye, no forwarding address, just gone. The kids stayed behind, living with their maternal grandparents permanently. When I visited, they seemed happier, calmer, more secure. Emma showed me her new room, covered in posters and drawings. "Grandma says I can take painting classes like you," she said proudly. I smiled, fighting tears. That night, as I drove home, the sun was setting behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. I thought about how different everything felt now. Quiet, almost too quiet. But peace has a strange texture when you've lived in chaos for too long. It doesn't always feel like relief at first. Sometimes it feels like loss. I started filling my weekends again with art exhibits, small trips, even volunteering at a local youth center. I wasn't running from my past, I was reclaiming it. But every now and then I'd catch myself wondering what David was doing. Was he okay? Did he find another person to lean on? Or was he finally standing on his own 2 feet? The truth is, I'll probably never know, and maybe that's for the best. About a year later, I received a letter in the mail. No return address. Just my name in familiar, uneven handwriting. It was from David. It wasn't an apology, at least not in the way I'd hoped. It was more like a justification. He wrote about how he felt cornered, how he believed I had betrayed him, how I'd taken away his freedom as a father. But buried near the end of the letter was one line that made me pause. You were right about one thing. I didn't know how to be responsible. Maybe I still don't. But the kids are doing okay, and I guess that means something. I read that line over and over again. It wasn't closure exactly, but it was something close. A tiny acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, he'd finally seen what I had been trying to make him understand. I folded the letter, put it back in the envelope, and tucked it into the same folder with all the old screenshots and documents. Not out of spite, but as a reminder. Boundaries are not cruelty. They are survival. When I think back to that night when the police knocked on my door, I realize it was a turning point. I thought I was being punished. I thought my world was collapsing. But in reality, it was just the start of a long overdue transformation. Because sometimes the people who accuse you of betrayal are the ones who've been betraying you the longest. When I sat down to write about this, I hesitated for hours. I've always been private about my life, but something about this whole situation, my brother's manipulation, my parents' silence, the guilt that still lingers, kept eating at me. I wanted to tell my story somewhere anonymous, somewhere people wouldn't see me as the cold sister or the family traitor. So I created a throwaway account and started typing. I wrote about everything: the knocks on the door, the lies, the guilt, the little card from Emma, even the letter David sent from wherever he ended up. I didn't sugarcoat it, but I also didn't villainize him completely. Because the truth is, part of me still understands him. I know what it's like to feel invisible in your own family. I know how easy it is to slip into habits where you rely on others to fill your gaps. But what I couldn't excuse anymore was how he made that my responsibility. When I finished typing, I sat back and reread the post. It sounded surreal, almost like something from a drama series rather than real life. But it was all true. Every word. I hit post before I could second-guess myself. Within hours, the comments started flooding in. At first, I was terrified to read them, but curiosity won. The top comment said, "You're not the asshole. You're someone who finally said no after being taken advantage of your whole life. Your brother needed consequences, not enablers." Another one read, "NTA, you didn't destroy your family. You stopped a cycle. There's a difference." And then, something that really hit me. This is what emotional labor looks like. You carried your brother for decades, and when you finally put him down, everyone acted like you dropped him. I cried when I read that, because that's exactly what it felt like. Not everyone agreed, of course. Some people said I could have handled things more privately, that calling CPS was extreme. "You could have just talked it out," one person wrote. I almost laughed at that. Talked it out? I had spent 30 years talking it out. That's the problem. Talking never changed anything. Boundaries did. The thread exploded overnight. Hundreds of strangers discussing my life, arguing, analyzing every detail. Some shared their own stories. Siblings who drained them, parents who took sides, moments when they finally chose themselves. It was overwhelming, but also comforting. For the first time, I didn't feel crazy. I didn't feel alone. A few days later, I got a message from someone claiming to be a social worker. She thanked me for writing my story, saying it highlighted exactly what happens when the responsible one in a family system becomes the default caregiver. She said she was using my post, anonymously of course, to help train new workers about boundary burnout. That made me emotional. Maybe sharing wasn't just for me, it might help someone else too. Meanwhile, my real life remained strangely quiet. No more angry calls from my parents, no messages from David, just stillness. It was eerie but peaceful. I used that time to rebuild what I'd lost. I started painting again, something I hadn't done seriously in years. I even hosted a small exhibition at the community center, my first ever. The theme, Wait and Release. Every painting represented something I'd carried for too long: guilt, silence, responsibility, love. People said the collection felt personal but universal. I smiled. It was both. Then, out of nowhere, one of my paintings sold. A stranger bought it. Someone who had read my Reddit post and recognized my style from the photos I'd posted online. They messaged me later. "Your story helped me leave an abusive marriage. That painting is my reminder that letting go isn't the same as giving up." I cried again that night, but this time they were tears of peace. For once, the pain had turned into something beautiful. Weeks passed, and the post eventually drifted down from Reddit's front page. Life went on. I still think about the kids sometimes, wondering if they'll grow up and ask questions about why their father disappeared, why things changed. If they do, I'll tell them the truth gently, that their dad loved them, but was lost. That love isn't always enough without responsibility. That family doesn't mean unconditional sacrifice. It means accountability, too. Sometimes I still get a twinge of guilt when I pass a playground or see siblings laughing together. I wonder if I could have handled things differently, if there was a version of this story where everyone got to stay together and be happy. But then I remember the night the police came, the exhaustion in my bones, the quiet voice that told me enough. There's something people don't tell you about setting boundaries. It doesn't always feel empowering. Sometimes it feels cruel. Sometimes it feels like breaking something sacred. But over time, you realize you weren't breaking the family. You were breaking the illusion that one person's comfort matters more than everyone else's well-being. The irony is, I used to think my story would end with an apology from David, but now I see that closure isn't something other people give you. It's something you give yourself when you decide you're done bleeding for someone who won't even stop holding the knife. It's been 2 years since that first night the police knocked on my door, and honestly, I still think about it sometimes. That sound, those heavy knocks, how my whole body froze even though I hadn't done anything wrong. I think that was the moment I realized how fear can live in you even after you start protecting yourself. It doesn't leave right away. It lingers, waiting for you to forget how far you've come. But I'm not that same person anymore. I'm not the woman who let guilt decide everything for her. I'm not the sister who said yes because saying no felt too cruel. I've learned that love without boundaries isn't love. It's self-erasure. Every once in a while, I'll get an email from my mother. She never mentions David directly, but her words always hover around him. "The kids are doing well," she'll write. "You should come for Christmas." I usually reply with something polite but distant. I know she misses how things were, but those good old days were only good for the people who didn't have to clean up the mess. Still, there's part of me that's softer now. Not toward David, but toward myself. I used to see my empathy as a weakness, something he exploited, but now I see it as strength, just one that needed direction. I can still care deeply without letting people drain me dry. I can still love without losing myself. One rainy Saturday, I was at a coffee shop sketching ideas for my next art project when I noticed a little boy drawing at the table next to mine. His mom was busy on the phone, but he was completely focused on his paper, tongue sticking out, crayons scattered everywhere. At one point, he looked up at me and said, "I'm drawing my aunt. She always saves me when Daddy forgets things." I smiled. He didn't know me, but it felt like the universe's way of saying, "See? There are more of you out there. The quiet rescuers, the ones who hold everything together until they finally learn to let go." That night, I painted something new. It was a large canvas with 2 hands, one letting go, one reaching out. but neither desperate, neither clinging. Just meeting in the middle, acknowledging the connection without the burden. I called it Enough. It became the centerpiece of my next exhibition. People lingered in front of it for a long time. One woman came up to me afterward and said, "I don't know why, but that painting made me feel like I could finally stop apologizing for doing what was right." I told her that was exactly how I felt too. Even though my Reddit post is old now, it still circulates from time to time. I'll see screenshots of it on Instagram or YouTube with titles like "Sister Exposes Manipulative Brother" or "The Day She Finally Said No." Some people dramatize it, twist details, make it sound like I was some sort of hero or villain, but that's fine. I know the truth. I wasn't either. I was just tired. And that's what I want people to understand. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't look brave. Sometimes it looks like exhaustion. It looks like sitting in the dark after everyone calls you heartless and still choosing not to give in. A few months ago, I received an unexpected letter. The handwriting was different this time. Neater, steadier. It was from Emma, my niece. She's a teenager now. She wrote about school, about her art classes, about how her little brother started playing guitar. Then she wrote this. "I remember when Dad used to get angry, and you would tell us to go play in the other room. I didn't understand it back then, but I think I do now. You were trying to protect us. Thank you for that." I read that line again and again until the words blurred. I don't know if David knows she wrote to me, and honestly, I don't care. What matters is that she remembers the truth, not the stories adults tell to protect their pride, but the moments that mattered, the small kindnesses, the safety, the love beneath the chaos. I wrote back, keeping it simple. I told her I was proud of her, that she didn't owe anyone her silence, that she could love her dad and still hold him accountable, because that's what healing really is, not choosing sides, but choosing truth. When I finished writing, I realized something that I wish I'd understood years ago. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors with locks. You decide who enters, when, and under what conditions. And if someone refuses to respect that, it's not cruelty to close the door. It's wisdom. So here I am 2 years later, sharing this story again, not because I need validation, but because sometimes we forget that saying no can be the most loving thing we ever do, not just for ourselves, but for the people who need to face their own consequences. I didn't destroy my family. I ended the pattern that was destroying us. So, am I the asshole? Let me know what you think in the comments. Would you have done the same thing? Do you think I went too far by involving CPS? I really want to know. Because even after everything, part of me still wonders if protecting myself meant crossing a line.